This evening on Hemispheres, we're going to take a look at American populism, in particular American populism as it manifests itself in Boulder. Populism is the traditional topic on Hemispheres. We might normally take a look at populism in El Salvador or in Chile or Burma, as we've done in the past. This evening, joining us in the studio, we have Mary Cal Hollis, former presidential candidate for the Socialist Party USA and local activist, and Jeff Milchen, organizer and local activist with Epicenter. Say hello, Jeff.
Good evening.
Okay, there we go. So, while I have, and I'm your host, Richard Curtis, this evening, while I have the two of you in the studio, first thing I thought we should do is address a little bit of the technical details. Listeners may have noticed that there's been a rise in organizations calling themselves or adopting a populist bent from earlier in American history. Locally, we have an organization called the Alliance, formerly a Colorado chapter, as part of the national organization that was just founded in the last couple of years. Mary, maybe you can help me on that.
Well, the local Boulder Alliance began mere months ago, and Ronnie Duggar has been organizing it nationally. And we got together. Addie Jurovac took responsibility for that and gave me a call and asked me if I wanted to have something to do with it, and I was delighted to. About the same time I heard about Epicenter, Jeff has been working with Epicenter, and we got together the Boulder chapter of the Alliance, and before we got very far, we realized that we were possibly duplicating services, and we really didn't want to do that, so I was, for a while, going to both meetings, and that got old pretty quickly, doing the same thing twice. So it was inevitable that we would join forces, and fortunately we have.
Well, and we might clarify that a bit by pointing out that there is a formal chapter of the Alliance, a Colorado chapter headquartered in Denver, with the people coming together in Boulder, initially with the idea of forming a separate Boulder chapter. Is that correct?
Well, that is correct, and really we even at one point had considered making the Epicenter a separate alliance and having two neighborhood alliances in Boulder, but we didn't like that idea. However, Ronnie Duggar actually had addressed that. He said that larger cities may have two or three alliances and work together but separately.
And Jeff, where then does Epicenter come into the picture?
Well, Epicenter began back in the fall, just prior to the founding convention of the Alliance, and we've had a consistent turnout of 20 to 30 active people within the group over the last several months. Whether that relationship between us and the National Alliance will be one of a direct affiliate or a less formal organization, we'll be doing everything we can to cooperate, to share resources, share ideas and networks with the Alliance for Democracy and any other organizations that are focusing in on the issues of corporate power in the world.
So how did you come to be involved in organizing Epicenter?
Well, I had been an activist on a number of different issues over the years, most recently in Boulder prior to Epicenter as an environmental activist, and came to feel over the years that we were constantly putting out brush fires in a sense. There was always a crisis of the moment to work on, whether it was environmental activists, social justice activists, and meanwhile, over the long term, it seemed like we weren't making progress on the issues. And I came to feel that corporate power and corporate control of society was a root cause behind so many of the different problems that activists face day by day, but yet there was little or no attention being paid to the fundamental question of what are corporations' role in society and why have we allowed them to assume the power they have today.
And so you began discussing this idea with other people.
Yes, it was an idea that came about probably a year and a half before actually starting Epicenter. One of the things that really sparked me was attending a weekend workshop with Richard Grossman of the Program on Corporations, Law, and Democracy in Massachusetts. He's been probably the leading person in the country on working on strategies to regain control of corporations through the corporate charter process directly, and he had a big impact on me and really helped focus my efforts on those root causes.
So, and how long ago did Epicenter formally get going?
It formally began in October.
Of just last year?
Yes.
And with how many people?
As I said, we've had somewhere between 20 and 30 people working actively within the group so far. At a typical general meeting, we have 15 to 20 people, and there are also many different working groups on more specific issues within the broad issue of corporate power in society. For example, we have working groups combating the influence of corporations in our schools and educational system, one on ways to create a strong local economy independent of corporate dependence, and several other more narrowly focused issues. Locally, we're open to anyone who has a particular interest to see if there's enough interest out there to form a group to work directly on those issues within the group.
And where does the name Epicenter come from?
From the epicenter of an earthquake. That's our goal, is to be ground zero for shaking up the corporate power structure and being the center of change.
So, Mary Cal, you had been working with the local alliance people and then got wind of what Jeff was doing.
Yes.
And that was when?
Right. I think it was in November when I
Okay.
actually realized it.
And so the two groups have been meeting together.
Well, actually, we didn't meet together until after Christmas, I believe, and but we will from now on.
So it's a whole brand new thing.
Brand new.
Okay.
You heard it here on KGNU.
Well then, the bigger question I think that I have and perhaps that some listeners have is, what do you all intend to do?
Revolution, I think, was what we discussed. What we'd like to, I guess I shouldn't have jumped in so quickly. I'll speak for Jeff and then I hate to speak for the organization, but what I would like to do is a lot of education, let people know what's really going on, and there's a lot of talk about corporate charters. We do have the right to revoke a corporate charter if they're not working in our best interest. That's a fact long forgotten and certainly would not be easy. Whatever we do is not going to be easy, but it certainly is a start. Long road ahead of us, but that never stopped us as environmentalists or us as civil rights advocates or us as feminists, and so we're just starting that fight.
And Jeff, that sums it up?
I would say, in a little more broad context also, we've let ourselves become dependent on transnational corporations for our daily needs. And when we become dependent on them for our livelihood, for our goods, our food, our necessities, that's where the economic and political power will lie. And that's the way it is today in this country and throughout most of the world. So we need to raise people's awareness of that dependence on corporations, as well as the issue of whether or not we will control or be controlled by corporations. We also need to focus on, in our daily lives, what are we doing to either create an independent society that's going to be guided by the will of the people, or letting ourselves creep toward that corporate dependence.
And why did people from, the two groups that you two have experience with feel that the need to create something new?
Go ahead.
Well, as I was saying, activists from many different issues have a common foe at the roots of their battles in corporations and the power they exert over society. Corporations
Well, no, I guess what I mean is that certainly there are groups of people, there are organizations and political parties that are have expressed interest in these issues for many decades. Why something new?
Well, there has been interest and growing awareness, I think, but I've seen very little evidence of anyone really working on the root causes and trying to bring about restore citizen control over corporations. So yes, there are a lot of groups out there who often mention corporations in their work, but despite the number of people who have it on their radar screen, I think it's such a critical issue because it is a root of so many different problems that there is a need to have people with that as their singular focus to bring that attention in on the corporations and to also serve as a network for all those other organizations that are aware of the problems to give them ideas and share resources and strategies on how they can be effective in combating those problems.
Mary-Cal, you come from a background with experience with some of the organizations I'm thinking of.
Yes, I probably do.
And what would you say about this issue, about why something new?
Well, I think focus was the main word that Jeff said. It is something that we need to focus on, and using this method does give it separate attention, and I think it will become a movement just like the environmentalists, just like civil rights, and that will help to bring up the awareness. Also, in my experience with many leftists or progressive groups, whatever, once you have a political party, sometimes it's very hard to work with other parties, and it's easier to work separately on the issues. And while all of us want to work on all of the issues, there are battles that we choose, and you may choose to work on one thing and send money to those working on pro-choice and environment and support other groups. So I think that there does need to be this forum just to focus the attention.
So do either the Alliance or Epicenter envision themselves growing into a political party, involving themselves in the political process?
Well, those are two very different questions. As far as political parties go, my personal feeling is no, that there are political parties out there who will be addressing these issues within their context, and it's very important, in my view, to have a messenger independent of the political parties, because if it's just a political party spreading a message, there's some natural degree of questioning as to, well, what's their motivation? Are they just trying to promote themselves? That's why I think it is important to have an independent messenger. As far as getting involved politically, absolutely.
How would that involvement look?
Personally, at the top of my list is 2 or 4 years down the road, having a statewide initiative to put to a vote by the citizens of Colorado in this state that will fundamentally alter the role of corporations in the state of Colorado, that will very explicitly limit the activities that corporations can engage in this state and put them into much more direct control by the citizens and have some very real consequences for corporations that act against the interests of the citizens of Colorado.
Mary-Cal, is your impression that this is the same line of thinking that the Alliance is taking in its national organization?
Yes, I think so. I don't think that they really feel like they're going to grow into a party. I think they will try to target members of the Alliance to run, and I think they will publicly support some candidates and not others. And I certainly hope that they will be out at all of the candidate forums asking questions and busting politicians for what they're saying and what they're doing.
Now, I guess I find all of that a bit mystifying because, Jeff, in particular, you've talked about addressing root causes, and it strikes me that the root issue here is power, and power is decided politically in most societies. So why not address the problem at that fundamental level?
Well, I believe we will be. Saying that we will not be a political party does not mean we will not be addressing the fundamental issue of political power. We certainly aim to. In addition to direct initiatives of our own, we need to get these issues out into the political debate, whether it's at the local level running for city council or the presidential debates. In the past presidential election, for example, the people who questioned the corporate-dominated system, Ross Perot and Ralph Nader, the two candidates in the general election, were excluded from the political process and by means of corporate control of the media and of the debates themselves. The debate commission is a network of corporations funding that, and they decided that in their idea, Ralph Nader was not a, quote, viable candidate, and neither was Ross Perot, despite getting a huge portion, 20% of the popular vote in the previous election. And it's because they didn't want the questions raised.
Well, wouldn't that analysis suggest that people should all join the Green Party en masse in order to support a candidate like that?
I think, we've seen civil rights movement work without going political. We've seen a lot of battles, pro-choice, anti-choice, a lot of them that have not been political. Actually, I think it's a more pragmatic answer. I think that those of us who are involved in Epicenter are making this our focus right now, and all of us are political enough to be very involved with a party that we already believe in, be it Labor Party, or Green Party, Socialist Party, whatever. So I don't think that the emphasis will be on making a political party out of it, just contributing to it. Also, while you say this is involving power and it is involving money, and it will take a long time before we can address it by replacing the politicians. And, we may get a lot further by addressing lawsuits first and going about it maybe both ways. It's not the only answer to be a party and run people for office.
If I might add
Sure.
to it, I didn't mention Mary Cal in my last statement, and she was also a candidate for President of the United States last year, and she certainly does address the root issues, so I want to make sure people are aware of that as well.
The larger issue behind my question would be the use of resources, that individuals have limited amounts of time and limited amounts of money, especially people who call themselves progressives. They tend not to be the ones who spend all their time figuring out how to get rich. So don't other structures, more and more structures, simply siphon off what might be very creative energy that could be used in more direct forums?
Well, first of all, the issues we're talking about here go far beyond progressives. These are issues that affect everyone in America, whether or not they consider themselves Democrat, Republican, progressive, conservative. People everywhere are impacted by corporate domination of society. This is by no means strictly a left or progressive issue.
Well, I guess I don't understand that. Seems to me it's exactly a left and right issue. Left being the idea that society should be democratic, and right being the idea that society should be run by elites. Elites being major shareholders in corporations, corporate presidents, or whatever.
I don't think it's a left-right issue. It's an up-down issue. You've got the money on the up part, and on the downside, the rest of us are the victims, most of the people in the United States. Whether we believe in leftist things such as pro-choice or we believe pro-life, pro-lifers are definitely to the right, and they are definitely being victimized by the concentration of wealth in the corporations. So it's not a left-right issue, it's an up-down issue, really, I think is what we were getting at.
So the people who would disagree with your point of view are not necessarily conservative Republicans. I don't see, that seems to me sort of obvious, and you're telling me that's not quite what's going on.
Conservative Republicans, it still is two different things. Conservative Republicans probably would be right-wing, but right-wing are not always corporate shareholders.
No, people adopt right-wing ideology because they are either confused or they support the idea of wealthy elites running the country. And isn't the whole idea that you're talking about changing the dynamic in our country so that rich people and their corporations aren't running the country, that people are?
Right, but I still think we're talking apples and oranges here. I think that it's not a left-right thing.
And I would add, in my view, I still hold some positive regard for people who are true conservatives, and a true conservative, I believe, would be appalled by transnational corporations dictating to the individuals all over the planet what their lives are going to be like and how their communities are going to be run.
That's fundamentally right-wing ideology. I mean, if someone is, that's what it means, right-wing, is that they believe that there's some people who are in a better position to know what should happen. In capitalist society, those people are the capitalists. They are the ones who control the means of production, the people who own the corporations. So it's either you believe that those people should be in charge, or you believe that the masses should be in charge. That's left-wing ideology. And aren't you saying that the masses, that people, democratically, should be in charge?
Yes, I am.
That's
my
left-wing
statement
ideology.
I don't grant the word conservative to the likes of Ronald Reagan or other right-wing extremist ideologues. I think there is still some positive attributes to that word.
Well, we do get confused in this country, conservative and liberal being social monikers, not necessarily political monikers.
Or
and
economic.
I'm concerned with the political
Right.
moniker
And
left and right.
What I'm saying is that the political and the social can be different from the economic. And people who socially consider themselves conservative don't quite realize that economically they're not conservative. It's not the same. They may buy into that without thinking that, oh, the corporations are the white guys and they're going to really save us. And if they really think about it, they've got to realize that the class difference in a rich person and a white person, a rich person and a poor person is much larger than the social differences in a conservative and a non-conservative. Still, my point is that some people it's just not a right-left issue, it is an up-down issue.
Okay. Well, let's get into the issue itself. The thing that you all have talked about is the power of corporations. And what does that mean to address the power of corporations?
Well, to myself, it means the fundamental question of who is going to be controlling one or the other. In this country, we started off with the citizens having very strict controls over corporations. They were very wary of the threat that corporations pose to democracy, to a just society. They had limitations, such as corporations could not act in any way to influence the legal or political system. Their charters were for a limited time. They retained the right to alter or revoke corporate charters at any time for any reason. And that's an important piece of history that we really need to learn and, I think, put back into effect. The citizens must have the right to dictate to corporations exactly what they will or will not permit them to do, not to be content with putting laws into effect to regulate behavior. I think we took a huge leap backward when we gave up on defining corporations and went with trying to regulate their behavior. And that's been, especially in the area that I'm most familiar with environmental issues, it's been a colossal failure to say that to attempt to regulate the amount, for example, of toxic pesticides that corporations can put into the food we eat, as opposed to saying this will not be in our food, which is the kind of step we need to take to say that a corporation that produces food will not use pesticides, period.
Mary?
Well, I think corporations have tremendous control over our society right now. They make sweeping decisions that are totally undemocratic. the canon did decide several years ago to make a mass movement from the factories in the Northeast, and would devastate communities up there to move to the South, because the South was more willing to have them there and not tax them so highly and not regulate environment at all. And then when they got a better deal with NAFTA, they could decide, even though they brought the economy there, they had businesses move and houses were built and an economy was built in the South for absolutely for their profit. They decided to abandon it and move to Mexico or wherever where they could exploit workers much more. They decide if they want to pollute. They decide what they want to pay. They decide if they want to hire you half-time so they don't pay benefits. And conversely, unions are one of the more democratic things that we see in our society still. But a tremendous amount of our lives are controlled by corporations and what they decide to do, but we have nothing to say about it.
Now, see that you all are describing corporations as sort of these abstract entities with power. Seems to me that corporations per se don't necessarily do a lot. It's people who do things. It's individuals who make decisions. Whether those individuals, are the three of us sitting around a studio talking about it, or the CEO of Disney and General Motors.
Well, there is some latitude as to what corporate executives may do. They're also tremendously controlled by the system as well. A CEO who decides that they're going to be a socially responsible company and does not maximize their short-term profits will face one of two futures. They will be bought out by a corporate raider who will see that they are not maximizing their profits and see potential in doing so, or they'll be canned by their board of directors or the shareholders for not doing that, because that's their legal responsibility in the structure as we now have it. It's a fundamental flaw in the system. And the examples of that are everywhere. Anytime a corporation does not abide by the laws of the market to maximize short-term profit, we've seen time and time and again, they're bought out, liquidated, the workforce is shrunk, and a person is put into place who is willing to maximize profit, whatever the costs involved in terms of environmental damage, damage to the social structure, leaving factory towns empty, and whether it's in Michigan or elsewhere in the country, to go out and open up cheaper plants in Mexico, Thailand, wherever else in the world they can do that. That's the way the system is designed, and it's moving more and more in that direction every day.
Well, that system that you're describing is called capitalism.
Yes.
And what you've mentioned in terms of a reform seem to have nothing to do with capitalism. It had to do with an entity that is acting or not acting, or how it's acting. I guess I'm a little puzzled by that.
Well, corporations are not merely tools at this point in this day and age. They are literally setting the agenda, both within our country and worldwide. With the advent of the World Trade Organization as part of the global agreement on tariffs and trade, corporations are now literally setting the policy on which the world is run.
Which people call the free market.
Well, I'd make a huge distinction between corporate capitalism and a free market. A free market is...
Okay. What is that?
Would be interesting to see happen, but I'm not aware of any place where that truly exists. Our corporate capitalist system is a far cry from that.
The cards are definitely stacked against the free market here. 1% of the United States owns 90% of the capital. It's taken on a mind of its own, and that's clear. It is the concentration of money and power. They do pretty much control what's going on in Washington, and it's the good old boy system. It's the glass ceiling. They all agree. They're all working for their own benefit, and they can get done whatever they want to.
But that's
And,
a natural outgrowth of the free market. That's the inevitable effect of the free market is the concentration of wealth.
teasing me here. Yeah.
That's
Jump
just
right in,
simple
Mary Cal.
economics.
Yeah, I would certainly agree that we do need to fight this capitalism here. I think that a lot of people feel like you can fight the corporations without fighting capitalism, and my question is why and how. And I get real tickled because you read this literature and it is so blatantly democratic socialist, and people say to me all the time, they say, you know, why do you want to say the word socialist? Why don't you just do what you want to do and not call it socialist? And I read this stuff and I watch these people, they get so excited about it, and it is democratic socialism, but they don't know it, so I get tickled. I like working with them. The aim is not with Epicenter to overthrow capitalism. I think that the aim with most of the people in Epicenter and the Alliance is to control what's going on. It's out of control now. We don't have any control.
And I'm puzzled as to how one controls the free market.
Well, if I could just follow up on that. Corporations and a free market are antithetical.
Okay, now I'm guessing most of our listeners just said,
Okay.
whoa, what does that mean?
Well, in my view, there is a great distinction between our corporate capitalism and a free market.
Okay, but what is that distinction?
Okay, to have a free market, if you're going to go back to, say, in the view of Adam Smith and the purists, that assumed that capital was rooted in a community in one place. Obviously, that does not happen with corporations. The assumptions were that people would be rooted in one place over their life, that capital would stay rooted to one location. And those are the basis on which that philosophy evolved initially. In his work, The Wealth of Nations, Adam Smith mentions corporations specifically 12 times, and not once in any kind of favorable context. He viewed them as an enemy to a true free market system. So whether or not you believe that a free market system would be a good thing or not, or whether you want to talk about socialism or some other ideology, there is no equation between a free market system and our corporate capitalism. They're two very distinct.
I mean, I find what you're saying very interesting, but that assumes somehow that history stopped with Adam Smith. And history didn't stop with Adam Smith. And
No,
in
it
fact,
did not.
the free market takes on a life of its own, that capital does become very mobile. And so if capital is very mobile, then Adam Smith was, naive for assuming that the free market would be able to control that, or what?
Well, that was an evolutionary change that took place. It could have happened differently. End up where we are now with corporate capitalism does not mean that's necessarily an inevitability that you cannot create a free market system and have enough control over it to prevent those huge concentrations of wealth and power, the fluidity of capital across the planet. There could have been different choices made. Obviously, it's too late to go back and try again now, but that doesn't mean that this was an inevitable process, in my view.
We would still have supply and demand without corporations, and can still deal with it.
But the issue would be the movement of capital overseas, that corporations become large enough to be international and therefore have the ability to move capital wherever they see fit.
We can still
okay.
I'm sorry. We can still do that, and have control over it. We, as citizens of the United States, as citizens of the world, as consumers, don't have to sit back and let other people make these sweeping decisions that are going on in our life. And that's what we're talking about. We're talking about democracy, having some control over these decisions and not just totally getting ripped off all the time.
We can reverse the process of global corporatization. It's been a conscious choice, and it's been progressed by corporations and their puppets in power in our government and elsewhere. And the World Trade Organization and the free trade agreements are the latest incarnation of that. We can just as easily say that we will not permit transnational corporations to have that fluidity to be able to move from one country to another, move their workers, their operations wherever they can get by the cheapest. We can say corporations must stay in this community or their assets will be forfeited. We have the power as citizens to dictate our laws, and we can just as easily create laws that favor local business and create strong, thriving local economies that give local business people the benefits rather than the transnational corporations, and build up a strong local economy and civic society rather than the globalization.
Okay, and how does one do that?
Gosh, it just seems so natural. It's like when you have a sustainable local economy, and there is trade with other villages, if you will. Even when Europeans started traveling the oceans, they could do international trade without having corporations. They fairly well controlled the wealth at that time too, but it can be done. Seems natural.
Well, I guess that would be the point I would make, is that what you do with corporations, what laws exist to control corporations, is really fundamentally irrelevant, because the issue is capital, is the movement of capital overseas. And corporations, I mean, who cares? You know, if the people with the capital move it overseas, that's people, that's not corporations. They may use the corporations to do that. But, you know, it's like, I mean, it's like the thing you described about the World Trade Organization, that corporations brought us, you know, sort of foisted upon us the World Trade Organization, which to me seems like it's sort of missing the point. You know, you're kind of watching the, you know, the smoke and mirrors and not noticing that there's a magician there, and the magician in this case being the individuals who own the corporations. They are the ones who foisted the World Trade Organization on us. The corporations were just a means by which they funneled money to buy politicians to get it done.
Well, to some degree that's true, but I don't believe that the CEOs are evil people. I believe it is a systemic problem that leads to these decisions and leads to the destructive impacts of corporations.
That the free market is evil.
We could get back into that distinction again, but I'd rather just steer off and say that these policies that make the fluidity of capital so great are conscious decisions.
Yes.
And it is not inevitable, despite even if we stay with a free market system, we can have laws that say capital will stay in this place via many different means. We can have laws that explicitly favor local business, that say transnational corporations doing business here in Colorado, for example, will pay 3, 4, 10 times the tax rate of any locally owned business. There are many, many conscious decisions we can make locally, statewide, nationally to regain control. This is not an inevitability. We have power here. We just need to regain it.
Didn't we once have a set of conditions in our country that looked vaguely like what you're describing? Well, we started off by talking about what things were like in, you know, early 18th century America, and the laws that we had that limited the behavior of corporations. So we had that, and then
there was a
went away.
There was a gradual corruption of that process, and yes, the concentration of wealth and power that took place despite those initial controls over corporations led to a situation where it was much easier for them to exert their power, to accelerate the process of gathering more power, corrupting our laws, which culminated in a Supreme Court decision in 1886 that said corporations are natural persons under the law and given the protections of the 14th Amendment. That was just an incredible event in this country's history that led to the situation we have now very directly. And we need to go back, relearn that history, and realize that that's something that's fundamentally wrong that needs to be changed.
But it happened once.
Yes.
How is what you're proposing going to deal with that and prevent it from happening all over again?
Once we get to the point where we can reverse that process, that decision, I suspect that my time here will be just about done, and we'll just have to place some faith in future generations to have learned from history and to not make the same mistakes that we made once.
Just as I don't think we have to worry so much about going back to a time of slavery. I think once we raise consciousness and show how things can be, that there's a good chance that it won't happen again.
Well, that sounds to me just a little naive. I mean, after all, before that decision, in the early 1800s, we had a problem with the concentration of wealth. That private ownership, capitalism, in its nascent form, engendered a very wealthy ruling class that grew and continues to this day to grow more and more wealthy. Just because you turn back the clock on the regulation of corporations doesn't, to me, obviously mean that you've eliminated the problem of the concentration of wealth that we're talking about now.
I think that what we have in mind also would turn back the clock on the corporations. It would address the concentration of wealth and the concentration of wealth and power. And I think that the point here is the enlightenment of the people. I think we have slowly been led to believe, and I think a lot of us still want to believe that this is going to work and we're all going to be wealthy. And a lot of times things have to get to their absolute worst before you come back up. And I think that we are at an absolute worst. Our society has proven what will happen with unrestricted greed. It doesn't stop. There's no point at which they're going to give everyone else a break. And we are led to think that the great patronizing white father, if you will, I'm not referring to all white men, of course, but we have been led to think that, and we're still seeing the very end of it. And I think that we will get over it and not go back to it.
And I would add, we are certainly not going to solve all the world's problems by putting corporations back into citizen control and doing away with the ones that act against their interests. But once that is done, we'll have removed a tremendous obstacle toward progress on social and economic justice in other ways.
Well,
the laws that favor the concentration of wealth in society are to a large degree driven by corporate interests. And yes, there has been a history of that concentration prior to corporations, but nevertheless, that remains a huge obstacle to making progress on that. And once we've got this one taken care of, I'd be happy to address the problems in a more broader context of the inequity.
Well, let's assume that this has happened. At some point, we place ourselves some point in the future, and corporations are limited in this way. Why wouldn't individual wealthy people, individual capitalists, simply act in the same way that they act now, but without a corporation to structure it for whatever legal and tax purposes they have?
With corporations' ability to control the political system out of the picture, for example, you're going to see the representation in offices change, in my belief. When corporations no longer have the power to donate huge amounts of money to get their puppets elected, when we can move toward a more democratic process, people will act in their own self-interest. And they will elect representatives, and they will get involved directly to have laws that do not encourage the extreme class stratification that creates such huge gaps between the rich and poor.
I don't think that you've addressed my question. What would prevent individual rich people from buying politicians the way corporations do now?
I think that's why I consider myself a socialist and go one step farther. And I think when I look over the literature, of the Alliance and Epicenter, they address this, but they don't make a large point of it. They talk about rich people as though they were exactly the same as corporations, and indeed, it would be hard to separate them in our particular society. I think a lot of people in Alliance and Epicenter assume that they are addressing that problem, and again, it is that other 10 or 20% of the problem is once you deal with corporations, you still have extremely greedy people who are going to try to figure out how to control things anyway. And I think that I would like to see a lot more controls on wealth in our society that is not involved in corporations, but I don't think there's much of it out there.
And what would distinguish what you all are talking about now from what Democratic Socialists of America have been talking about since they were founded in the 60s?
A lot of it is very much the same. A lot of it. Alliance talks about corporate welfare, talks about defense. It's corporate welfare. In the Defense Department, they talk about the wealth. Democratic Socialists do go farther to include civil rights, freedom of women to control their own bodies. So a lot of the principles are very much the same as far as I can see, but Democratic Socialism would address more than the Alliance Epicenter does.
Being the fundamental issue that they share. I mean, that this is the fundamental issue to Democratic Socialists, and it is the issue. That's what you're telling me. The issue to Epicenter.
Basically, that's true. The issue being economics, the corporations, although I repeat, they do address defense, they address effectiveness of where we're using our funds, and so there's a little more, but basically, yeah.
On that, I would add that many of the reforms or transformations that we advocate would also address those problems of wealthy individuals. If you have, for example, publicly financed campaigns 100%, that would be a serious obstacle toward individuals exerting their corrupting influence on electoral politics as well as corporations, and that's the case with many of the different ideas we have for change in society. They will not only address issues of corporate power, but address issues of inordinate power by the wealthy.
But you don't envision changing the basic structure of private property and capitalism.
I would not say that's a realistic goal for Epicenter now, at this point.
Well, since we're counting down, why don't we get to realistic goals? What is the program from here?
Well, our first realistic goal is to have a conference in February. Jeff, you want to tell them about the conference?
Sure. Initially, public education is what we see as the most important priority for the first several years here, just to raise issues in the general public, to raise people's awareness of the extent of corporate control in society, how it impacts them as individuals. And to that end, we've gotten together with many different organizations here in Boulder, including the CU Environmental Center, Rainforest Action Group, and Student Environmental Action Coalition, to put on a 3-day public forum, which is happening February 13th through 15th here in Boulder. We have a tremendous array of activists from around the country as well as locally coming in to discuss issues of corporations' role in society. Many open panel discussions where we'll get both the corporate and activist side of the issues, as well as workshops to give activists specific tools to work against the encroachment of corporate power in society. To get more information on that conference, folks can call us up at Epicenter, which is 303-402-0105, or at the University of Colorado Environmental Center, 492-8308.
What were the dates of that again?
That is February 13th through 15th, and that is a Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. And there are events going continuously all day each of those days. There are generally 2 different panels or workshops that people can choose to attend at any one time.
Were you planning some specific advertising that people might watch for if they wanted more information? Or should they just call?
They should.
They should call immediately and get information on Epicenter as well as the conference. And again, that's 402-0105.
They should stay tuned to KGNU.
Well, that's true. We at Hemispheres have been invited to do a little bit of taping, so that's something that listeners can keep their ears perked for. As we're hoping to bring some of that to the listening audience, for people who aren't able to get out on a Thursday or Friday, especially to participate in such a conference.
There also will be some airing of various parts of the conference on community television.
In Boulder, the Channel 8?
At this point, we're not sure about Boulder. We have a commitment for folks from Longmont, and we're working on it with some other community TV groups.
And beyond talking to people, what do you all hope to get out of this 3-day experience?
Well, again, one of our primary goals is educating and getting people talking. I think people underestimate the value of talking with friends and neighbors, and it's the main reason why we're here.
I mean, this is a extremely far-reaching and a deep issue in society, and in the context of even an hour, people cannot really learn what they need and ask the questions they need, make the connections with what's most important to them. You need a chance to talk to a lot of different people, and hopefully the extent of this over 3 days will give everyone a chance to, first of all, find what's most important to them and closest to their heart to get involved with, to find other people in their communities, because we do expect people from around the state to come to this conference. And if we get, for example, a dozen people from Fort Collins who, for the large part, may not know each other, see each other at this conference, get to work together, that could be the start of a whole lot of productive work happening in Fort Collins or other places where the issue may not be on the map at the moment.
And Jeff, you mentioned something a bit earlier in our conversation that also was concrete action. Citizens petition in 2 or 4 years?
Well, it's just in the idea stage at this point, and it depends on how successful we feel we've been on raising the issues to the point where something like that could have a chance of succeeding. But in the year 2000, there's a distinct possibility that we will try to bring about a citizen initiative that will say corporations in Colorado may do this. They may excuse me, may not do any of the other things except what we specifically permit them to do. Say, the widget corporation may produce widgets. They may make a profit for producing those widgets. They will not be able to participate in any way in our educational system, political system, or other realms of society that should be strictly the privilege of flesh and blood human beings to participate in.
And you would envision this passing as an amendment to the Colorado Constitution?
Quite possibly.
As opposed to a general legislative initiative?
Our hopes for...
I guess what I'm asking is, would it need to be, would the kind of change that you're talking about need to be at the level of constitutional change, or could it happen as simply legislative change?
It definitely could happen as legislative change. The question is more a strategic one at this point.
Yeah. Mary?
And given the concentration of wealth and power even in our state legislature, it probably would have to be done by citizens initiative.
Okay. And is this also something that's being discussed around the country?
It has been brought up, but our real focus on this issue is very new. Richard Grossman, who's the one of our keynote speakers at the conference, has been working on this through the program on corporations, law, and democracy. And one of the hopes here is that by getting together with him, we'll be able to work toward possibly establishing a model corporate charter to try and pass state by state throughout the country. As it is, Epicenter was only the third group in the country really devoted to this issue. So it's, at this point, it's so new that we still have a lot of work to do in that organizing and developing strategic plans.
So it's not something that someone has come up with, a draft text that people around the country could consider to use in such initiatives?
There are people working on it, but we still have a
Right,
lot of
'cause we-
refining to do on that.
Okay, because it's that new. And as we count down just the last couple minutes, do either of you have some last thoughts that you'd like to share?
I was delighted to see this kind of work, and I think it's very important to have a lot of locals working on this, and I think it's really exciting that there is a national web of people who are interested in the same thing. It's a large monster, if you will, and we need a lot of national coordination, and still it all has to be done at the local level. But it is one of the major diseases of our society, and it's exciting that spontaneously across the country all of a sudden a whole lot of people are interested in seeing justice here, and I'm delighted to be a part of it.
Jeff?
I'd just like to say remind everyone of the extent of the power they have in their everyday lives. Every time you have lunch, you have a decision to make. If you're going to get some food, whether to buy it from a local merchant, support your local economy, create independence in your community, or whether you're going to go to a corporate fast food chain, which will suck the dollars out of your community, make it more and more dependent on external forces over which you have no control. Every day we have hundreds of decisions like that have an influence. If we all start being more conscious of those little decisions every day, and in our interactions with other people we meet every day, raise these issues and try and do our best to raise everyone's awareness and action on it, there is real hope for us to make progress on this.
Well, thank you all, both of you, very much for joining us here. You've been listening to Hemispheres on KGNU Boulder. We've been speaking with Mary Cal Hollis and Jeff Milchen. My name is Richard Curtis. I've been your host this evening. Coming up at 7 o'clock here in just a minute, we have Corriente. First, this brief musical interlude.